Welcome to the Past in Pictures channel. Be sure to subscribe and like so you don't miss out on more videos like this one. Unit 7. 31 operated before and during the Second World War as a Japanese military research center. Decades later, its activities became a subject of intense historical and ethical debate and are often cited as an example of the risks of scientific projects carried out in a wartime context. Omaira Sanchez, 13 years old, was trapped in the ruins of her home during the mudslide that struck Armero, Colombia in 1985 after a volcanic eruption. Rescue teams worked for hours trying to save her, and the episode became a symbol of the difficulties in responding to natural disasters at that time. Blanche Monnier from Poitiers, France, spent years isolated in a room in her own home until she was found in 1901 after an anonymous report. The case revealed a severe situation of deprivation and led authorities to look more closely at vulnerable situations inside families at the time. Tara Calico disappeared in 1988 in New Mexico, and months later a photo appeared in Florida showing a young woman and a boy in an unusual situation inside a van. The possible connection to Tara drew national attention and expanded the search. But the young woman's identity was never confirmed by authorities, and the case remains unsolved to this day. A message written by the so-called lipstick killer appears on a wall, photographed during investigations in the mid-1940s in Chicago. The text was left at one of the crime scenes and drew attention for showing the desperation and threatening tone of the writer. The house in Amityville, New York, appears only hours after the crime in which Ronald DeFeo Jr. was held responsible for taking the lives of members of his own family. The location quickly became tied to the case because of the severity of the episode and turned into one of the most well-known crimes in recent United States history. John Lennon signs an autograph for Mark David Chapman in 1980 as he leaves his building in New York City, a moment later remembered in a dark way, because only a few hours later, the musician was fatally attacked in the same place. The scene records the last public contact between the two. The photo taken shortly before the Dyatlov Pass incident in 1959 shows part of the group during the expedition in the Ural Mountains. The harsh weather and snow indicate the challenging conditions faced by the 9 hikers, and it became part of the material used in investigations into what happened to the group. A nuclear test from the 1950s is captured with Harold Edgerton's rapatronic camera, which was able to record the first expansion of the explosion with a shutter speed of 1/100 millionth of a second. The moment shows the formation of the bright sphere in the first instance of the detonation. The manager of the Monson Motor Lodge, James Brock, pours a chemical into the hotel pool in St. Augustine, Florida, in 1964 to force black protesters out during a peaceful demonstration against segregation. The episode became one of the most remembered cases of resistance to integration during the civil rights movement. Dorothy Counts appears in Charlotte, North Carolina in 1957, walking toward Harding High School, where she became the first black student to enter an all-white school in the United States after federal decisions on integration. The scene shows white classmates insulting her and surrounding her along the way. Anneliese Michel, a Catholic teenager in Germany in the late 1960s, began to have sudden fainting spells at school and, over time, seizures and behaviors that her family saw as very unusual. As they noticed her condition worsening, her relatives sought medical help and also religious support in an attempt to understand and address what was happening. Images taken inside Ed Gein's house show the isolated and disordered interior during the police investigation in 1957, revealing a setting marked by neglect and objects scattered in a chaotic way. The photographs were used only to document the condition of the home after his arrest. The Stanford Prison Experiment began on August 14, 1971, when psychology professor Philip Zimbardo divided college volunteers into 2 groups, 11 acting as guards and 10 as prisoners, creating a mock prison inside a university building. The goal was to observe how social roles influence behavior. Captured Chinese soldiers during the Korean War in 1951 kneel and raise their hands, afraid of what might happen to them, a common reaction in the face of uncertainty about how prisoners would be treated. The image shows the moment when they wait for orders from the troops who captured them, portraying intense tension on the Asian front. Father Luis Manuel Padilla supports a wounded government gunman during clashes in the streets of Puerto Cabello, Venezuela in 1962, when a military uprising took part of the city. The image shows the priest trying to give aid in the middle of the fighting, and the episode marks a moment of intense political instability in the country. A photo of Zita Seuss, one of the hundreds of thousands of children taken from their families by the German regime of the time, records her condition of displacement during the occupation and symbolizes the direct impact of child transfer policies. The Chalifot family in Chicago faced severe financial hardship in 1948, just before an eviction and with no steady income. In this context, the couple went so far as to offer their children for adoption, an act that drew public attention to the lack of social support and protection policies for vulnerable families at the time. Gas masks for babies were developed in the United Kingdom during the Second World War because of fears of chemical attacks, covering the child's entire body and working through a hand-operated bellows that kept the air filtered. The equipment represents extreme measures taken to provide protection for children. An old photo shows a man with a rare congenital condition that makes his face appear to have duplicated features. The record was preserved in medical and historical archives as an uncommon example, used mainly for study and documentation of variations in human development. The story of the so-called Elephant Man became known because of a 19th century man who lived with a rare condition that caused abnormal tissue growth on his face and body. His case was widely documented by doctors of the time and ended up being shown in public presentations. A man with a rare physical condition appears with his facial features emphasized in a record made in an era when unusual traits were documented for study and historical archives. The photograph shows details of his face and expression following the straightforward style used in early medical records. A man had a rare medical condition in which excess skin around the neck formed long, unusual folds. He was photographed for medical records and studies of the time, in a period when rare physical traits were documented directly for scientific understanding. Known as Lobster Boy, he was a circus performer with a genetic condition that made his hands and feet look like lobster claws. He lived in Gibsonton, Florida, and became one of the most famous figures in 20th century traveling shows, appearing at fairs and performances that exhibited people with unusual physical traits. An old photo shows a mother and her 4 children, all with the same genetic trait that alters the shape of their hands. The portrait was preserved as a historical record of an unusual family condition, and today is remembered in studies on genetics and variations in human development. The image shows members of the Heaven's Gate group who believed they would reach a new level of existence on another plane. The photo was taken in the United States during the time they lived together in a house in California, shortly before a tragic collective episode on March 26, 1997, that permanently marked the group's history. A child associated with an extremist group meets a black state trooper during a protest in Gainesville, Georgia, in 1992. The scene shows the striking contrast between racist positions and the work of public officers, highlighting the tensions present in demonstrations of that period. George McLaurin, the first black student admitted to the University of Oklahoma in 1948, is shown sitting alone in a segregated area of the classroom while white classmates occupy the rest of the space. The scene shows how segregation continued even after his formal admission, revealing the barriers imposed on black students in higher education. A cafe near the tobacco market in Durham, North Carolina, shows separate entrances marked white and colored, reflecting the enforcement of racial segregation laws in the American South. The scene shows the imposed division in access to basic services and the period record's discriminatory rules that shaped everyday life. A bar in Bernie, Montana, in August 1941, displays a sign reading, "Positively no beer, sold to Indians," indicating a discriminatory rule aimed at indigenous people. The words at the entrance reveal the explicit ban imposed by the business and the period record's exclusion policies used in commercial spaces. Millie and Christine McCoy were conjoined twin sisters who were born enslaved in the 19th century and eventually were displayed in public shows of the time. They became known as the Two-Headed Twins and performed at fairs, circuses, and events that showcased unusual physical traits. The photo shows a performer displayed in 19th century circuses who was labeled in her time as the ugliest woman in the world, a title used only to draw crowds and exploit her unusual appearance. This kind of presentation shows how entertainment turned physical differences into spectacle, ignoring the humanity behind the person on display. A photograph taken in 1976 inside the Amityville house became known for its unsettling appearance and began to circulate as an enigmatic image of the place. After the crimes involving the DeFeo family, the new resident George Lutz reported strange phenomena in the home and sought help from investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. Taken in the morning of 1952, this photograph shows 4 unidentified objects hovering over Salem, Massachusetts, an image made by Shell Alpert at the Coast Guard Air Station. The lights appear over the areas of Winter Island and Cat Cove, and few details were confirmed beyond the place and the time of the sighting. The photo shows Roger Chaffee, Virgil Grissom, and Ed White gathered casually around a model of the Apollo 1 capsule taken during preparations for the mission in the United States. The scene gained powerful meaning after the fire during a test on January 27, 1967, when the 3 astronauts were unable to escape the module. The photograph known as the Pioneer's Defense, taken in 1937 in the Soviet Union, shows children wearing gas masks and protective gear used in civilian drills, part of exercises meant to prepare the population for the feared threat of chemical attacks. Dragoljub Jelačić, only 12 years old, appears in Belgrade in 1914 during the First World War, serving as a messenger among the fighting that was closing in on the city, showing how even young boys were drawn into the war effort. Several empty artillery shells lie along the roadside in a front line zone during the First World War, indicating rounds already fired toward German lines. The spot records recent heavy artillery activity, and the period reveals the intensity of ongoing combat, with the scene showing direct traces of military movement on that stretch of the battlefield. Stiff doll masks, sacks pulled over heads, and costumes with oversized skulls make up unsettling images from children's Halloween celebrations in past decades, showing outfits made from simple materials and exaggerated shapes. Visitors take part in an unusual picnic at the old California Alligator Farm, a tourist attraction active between 1907 and 1953, where people mingled at close range with many alligators kept on display. The record documents a practice of the time when direct contact with animals was offered to the public as an organized experience by the venue. Robert Wadlow became known as the Gentle Giant, reaching the greatest height ever recorded in a human being, the result of continuous growth caused by a rare condition of the pituitary gland. His extraordinary stature turned him into a legendary figure admired everywhere he went. Chang and Ang Bunker were born conjoined in 1811 in Siam and gained worldwide fame for their unusual condition. They traveled on international tours before settling in the United States, where they started families and lived independently. Their story gave rise to the term Siamese twins. Adam Rayner became known as the only documented case of someone who lived first as a dwarf and later as a giant. He spent his youth with short stature because of a condition that limited his growth, and, as an adult, developed a tumor in the pituitary gland that triggered rapid growth. The photos show Ted Bundy in everyday moments with family members, taken in simple settings and ordinary situations of the time. These records were preserved in collections that gather visual material linked to his personal life before the investigations that made him widely known in criminal history. This rare photo from the 1930s shows a performer famous for her feats of strength, able to lift several people with ease while appearing in circuses and variety shows. She became known as a superwoman for combining physical power, control, and stage presence in a time when such performances drew great attention. In the tradition of a specific cultural group, some women wear circular ornaments fixed on each side of the nose, like discs inserted in the nostrils. These adornments mark identity, belonging to the community, and in many cases, important stages of life, such as the passage into adulthood. Princesses of the Qajar dynasty in the early 1900s became known for appearing in official portraits of Persia, with features valued at the time, such as strong eyebrows, light facial hair, and richly detailed traditional clothing. This photo shows a woman belonging to a cultural group that wears metal rings around the neck from youth, a practice that gives the impression of elongation and represents identity and tradition within the community. She appears carrying out daily tasks, revealing how this custom is a natural part of everyday life. An old story tells of a man who claimed to have lived 256 years, drawing attention for his supposed extreme longevity. According to reports, he shared traditional practices and knowledge seen as unusual. Although never proven, the case became one of the most famous myths about long life. The old photo shows a couple presented in newspapers and almanacs as parents of 69 children, a symbol of extremely large families in rural communities of earlier centuries. According to these accounts, over many years they built a home filled with children of many ages. The photo shows Maurice Thiele with striking physical features that in the past were used by sensational newspapers and fair pamphlets to create exaggerated stories about prehistoric giants or beings discovered in excavations. These images were often tied to fictional tales about archaeological finds. Schlitzie became known for taking part in early 20th century entertainment, in shows and films that included performers with different appearances in the cast. She became one of the most remembered figures of that kind of presentation, appearing in historical records and promotional photographs of the period. Stefan Bobrowski, known as the man with a lion face, was a circus artist shown at old fairs because of a condition that caused excessive hair growth on his face. He became one of the notable figures of shows of the time, when unusual physical traits were presented to the public as curiosities. The photo shows an extremely tall African man posing beside two small girls, creating a striking height contrast that draws attention in the image. The scene was captured in a time when such portraits were used to document physical differences that people saw as historical curiosities. A man of exceptionally tall stature walks beside a girl in an African village, creating a striking contrast between them. The scene shows a simple moment of rural daily life with traditional houses in the background and trees around them, preserving a fragment of community life from that time. Prince Randian, a famous performer who lived without arms and legs, built a family life with his wife in the early 20th century. Together, they showed that even lives considered extraordinary had room for affection and daily routine. The couple's story became a symbol of the humanity behind old shows. An elderly woman was photographed with an unusual growth in the forehead area, recorded in old medical archives as a rare case of hardened tissue formation. Images like this were used for study and documentation of conditions that were poorly understood at the time, with a focus on scientific observation and historical record. This old image shows a couple of short stature posing side by side, taken in a time when people with different physical traits often appeared in photo studios or public shows. The portrait preserves a simple and affectionate moment from the past. This photo shows two circus performers displayed together to highlight an extreme contrast. On one side, a man of very short stature used as a show dwarf, and on the other, a giant whose height far exceeded the average of the time. They were deliberately presented side by side to create visual impact. This old photograph shows a woman standing next to a man of extraordinarily tall stature, creating a striking contrast between them. The woman leans on him to adjust something on his head, which makes the difference in height even more obvious. Eiko and Aiko were two performers known as the Men from Mars in popular shows of the past. They were presented at fairs and stage acts that explored fantastic themes, using costume and unusual appearance to create the idea of figures from another world. An artist whose body was almost completely covered with tattoos became known in old circuses as an unusual attraction, since extensive tattoos were rare and drew huge attention at the time. He traveled with traveling shows, displaying the designs as part of his performance. David Navarro was presented in 1882 in popular shows that displayed people with physical traits considered unusual for the time. He was part of fair and circus attractions that turned bodily differences into public entertainment, something common in the 19th century. Girls photographed in 1898 display hair that reaches almost 1.5 meters in length, nearly 5 feet long, something considered impressive for the time. The portrait shows the care and value given to long hair in certain 19th century customs. An old photograph shows a man with a very long beard that nearly reaches his feet, something that drew a lot of attention by the standards of the time. Records like this were common at fairs and public shows, where physical traits seen as curiosities were displayed as part of the entertainment. An old photo shows a man known for growing a beard so long that it reached the floor, attracting attention for its striking length. He became a well-remembered figure at fairs, exhibitions, and photographic records of the 19th century. This old photo shows a 19th century stage performer known for using her body as part of humorous and curious acts. At fairs and circuses of the time, people with physical traits outside the usual range were exhibited as popular attractions, reflecting a period when entertainment strongly focused on the unusual. Delina Rossa became known in the early 20th century for performing at fairs and shows alongside other artists whose looks were considered different for the time. She took part in popular performances that brought together people with distinctive physical traits in a context where such displays were part of traditional entertainment. A man known for being able to stretch his own skin in an unusual way was exhibited at fairs, circuses, and old stage shows. This kind of act was common in times when rare physical traits were displayed to the public as a form of entertainment. An artist once known in old performances as the Skeleton Man was exhibited at fairs and shows because of his extremely thin body. These records are part of a period when people with unusual physical traits were presented to the public as attractions, a common practice in early circus shows. Professor Rickleton appeared beside two companions who represented extremes of height, a very tall man and a short man, forming a trio exhibited in events and old records. Such presentations were common at fairs and shows in the early 20th century, where physical contrasts were used as an attraction. Before alarm clocks were reliable, London residents hired people known as knocker-uppers, and Mary Smith was one of them. She used a tube to shoot small peas at the windows of houses, waking clients at the agreed time. It was an old and curious method of getting workers out of bed. John Wayne Gacy appears as a baby in a photo from the early 1940s, holding two toy guns, a common choice in children's portraits of the time. Decades later, however, the image would be remembered with tragic irony, since he became one of the most notorious criminals in the United States. The image shows a woman posing in a studio with exceptionally long hair that reaches the floor. She wears a patterned dress and leans on a decorative stand in a style typical of portraits from the late 19th or early 20th century. The photograph highlights the unusual length of her hair. Before he became famous, Tim Allen spent time in prison for involvement in drug trafficking. To reduce his sentence, he cooperated with authorities and, after facing the legal consequences, changed the course of his life. Over time, he returned to performing and eventually became a well-known name in Hollywood. The image shows the still face of a wax figure on display in a history museum, created to represent a day-to-day scene from the period and finished with details that reproduce traditional sculpting techniques. A period circus performer poses beside a woman of short stature in a setup designed to create a striking visual contrast, typical of shows of that time. This kind of photo was part of the promotion for performances that highlighted the physical diversity of the artists and sought to catch the public's eye with curious images. An extremely tall man poses next to a short performer nicknamed Princess Tiny, creating a visual contrast that was used as an attraction in old shows. The record preserves a typical moment from circuses and sideshows in the early 20th century, when figures called gentle giants were presented to the public. Kiko and Sulu were two performers shown in traveling shows in the early 1900s, labeled in offensive ways by the entertainment industry of the time because of their physical traits. They were exhibited at fairs and circuses that turned bodily differences into public attractions. Behind the official image of a queen, Elizabeth had routines, quirks, and personal relationships that almost never appeared in public, from strict daily habits to discreet gestures of affection with family members and close staff. Those private moments, recorded in accounts and rarely seen photographs,